Marsha Lazareva was arrested in 2017 on false allegations of money laundering and embezzlement associated with her legitimate business activities in Kuwait. She was immediately taken into custody despite being the sole caregiver of her 4-year-old son, leaving him without his mother, and held in circumstances where she ought to have been granted bail. We say that her detention was arbitrary. She spent more than 470 days in prison fighting these charges.
We have not had a fair trial in this case. In the original trial, the defence was never allowed to put their case, and as the defence witnesses were coming up to give their evidence, the judge announced that he'd already come to his decision. The documents that are supposed to be forged have never been produced. The main witness against her has himself now been convicted of forging not just any document, but those very documents.
Marsha Lazareva was arrested in a way which did not satisfy the formal requirements for a detention, which makes it absolutely clear that her detention is an arbitrary detention.
Despite the fact she's been granted bail and is now out of prison, she continues to be intimidated by 24/7 surveillance and the ongoing uncertainty about what's going to happen with this case.
Marsha is the single mother of a 4-year-old little boy called Ivan. He's now stuck in Kuwait, being looked after by his grandmother, who's had to fly over from the US to look after him.
I've been able to speak to Marsha on the phone, and I went over to Kuwait twice, and I was able to speak with her in court. I could see myself how much she has been affected by being imprisoned for 472 days.
Since being arrested, Marsha has been held in overcrowded prison conditions in the women's prison in Kuwait, with more than 7 women with her in an overcrowded small cell. She's not had adequate facilities to be able to prepare her defence. She's not been able to meet privately with her lawyers, and she's been kept separated, heartbreakingly, from her young son. This has had a serious impact upon her mental health and well-being, and indeed her physical well-being. We have long held concerns about her treatment within the prison and by police officers escorting her to and from prison.
One of the things that really strikes me about Marsha is that she's a real international character. She is a Russian citizen, but she's lived in the US, where she has a home in Pennsylvania. She graduated from Wharton School of Business, which is a very prestigious school. And she's also held an investor visa in the UK, where she's also enjoyed living.
She got very successful, made a lot of money for her investors. But that somehow triggered a lot of envy, anger. That led, I believe, to her punishment. Her guilt was that she was a woman, a foreign woman, a businesswoman, very successful one, a hard-working one, and very successful with bringing big money and doing big business. So that wasn't liked by the competition and by some state officials.
Saeed Dashti, who is chairman of KGLI, remains in prison. He is being subject to the same mistreatment. He's been accused of similar crimes, and again, without evidence being put to him or a fair chance to present his case. So we need to continue to fight for his freedom as well.
Her treatment and the way her case has been handled in Kuwait raises real questions for foreign investors about their willingness to engage in Kuwait, the rule of law in Kuwait, which is so important for business investment and foreign investment.
If a state itself is arbitrarily detaining someone over a business dispute, that often discourages other businesses or executives. If that sets the example on what state governments are going to do with individuals or companies coming in, then people will be wary to go into that particular country and do business there if they fear that their life or their properties are in danger.
The issue of business being able to be carried out freely and without interference from the police and the courts and so on is perhaps as much of a human right as the right to criticize governments and so on. This kind of arbitrary detention is increasingly a weapon in commercial competition.
When you are at the end of a prison, in the bottom of a prison, deprived of all your fundamental rights, human relations, there is no rich and no powerful anymore. if we do not defend fundamental rights for those who are in the light of media, why should we do so for people whom fate doesn't interest anyone?
Human beings have rights, and you don't opt out of those rights simply because you're rich. These are two ordinary people who come from extraordinary backgrounds, and they've been treated abominably.
We have made several complaints to the United Nations special mechanisms. First, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, and more recently, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Independence of Judges and Lawyers. We are calling on Kuwait to respect its international human rights obligations, to drop all of the baseless charges against Marsha Lazareva, and to allow her to get on with her life.
In this case, the case of Marsha Lazareva in being unjustly detained in Kuwait, the President of the United States has been briefed, the Secretary of State has been briefed, and so have many of his advisors as well as key members of Congress.
Well, Marsha and Saeed's convictions have been overturned, and they're about to embark on a fresh retrial. And I think the world will be watching to see if this time the Kuwaiti courts can get it right and respect their basic human rights and fair process expectations.
It's in the best interest of Kuwait to drop this case that is purely based upon a business dispute. And let's go ahead, release Marsha and her colleague Saeed, and let's move on from this so we can address the real national security threats in the region.
I think the question here for Kuwait is this just a dreadful mistake and a failure of a few bad decisions in the system? Or is there in fact a bigger systemic problem with the justice system in Kuwait? At the moment, I think Marsha's fate has put a big question mark over anybody who would be thinking of coming to invest in or to work in Kuwait.
The court will have no choice but to release Saeed, throw the case out as baseless, remove the travel bans, and return the bail. Kuwait can celebrate this moment as a success for its independent judiciary system.